Part of the reason I am reviewing this entire book series right now is because I'm about to move this Friday, and I probably won't bring this with me. The less stuff I have to bring with me, the better. So I'm gonna review this series now so I can give these books away. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle your seatbelts because today we are going over the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. This book series is one of the few that I physically own because I brought these to the National Training Center. And you can probably see they're a little dirty, a little filthy, especially this first one, because we had a lot of time to kill, no phones, and before long, I was passing these books around like blunts. And I will say straight up before I get into this book review that I thoroughly enjoyed this first book. Easily 4 stars, probably 4.5. The next two were not as strong. There's a couple reasons for that, and I'll try to explain that with as few spoilers as possible. So, a fun fact, the reason these books were getting passed around like blunts during NTC is because almost no one brought books. Like me and my NCO brought books, and that was about it. I kid you not, this is a side note, I kid you not, I had one soldier who brought cologne, and he didn't bring books.
Sean, what's the matter with you?
Oh, you gotta love soldiers. And then one of the only books that my soldiers did bring was Colleen Hoover. It Ends With Us. I shit you not. Oh man, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. Anyway, these books were in high demand, and I was very proud to give people this book because I thought this book was a strong read and very engaging, whereas these two were just not as strong. So the funny thing is, about 2 or 3 months ago, I would not have been as glowing with my review as I am today for this book, because at the time I had only read like epic fantasy bangers. The Stormlight Archives, Wheel of Time series, Game of Thrones, just the greats, the elites of this genre. And this book, it's not quite there. But since then, I have read several epic fantasies that I have not enjoyed. And almost each epic fantasy I have enjoyed a little bit less than the last one. And now I look back at this book with the lens of nostalgia, and I'm like, wow, this book was so good. Why was I so hard on it? Probably because the next two are not nearly as good, which is a real shame because this first book is actually fantastic, and I would strongly recommend this book to anyone who is into fantasy and epic fantasy. This is definitely a good read. So the 3 main characters throughout this book series are Vintage, Noon, and Tourmaline. I'm just gonna call him Tor for the rest of this book. And fun fact, because this is one of the few physical books that I've read, and it's a fantasy book, I honestly don't know how to pronounce most of these names. So I'll just throw their names on the screen. I'm not even sure how to explain the plot of this book because it is a weird book. And part of what kept me absolutely hooked on this first book is that I had no idea where Jen Williams was going to take this story. And normally that sounds like a critique, like it wouldn't be a good thing. You know, like you're just what's that long web series, The Wandering Inn, where you know, it's just kind of meandering, you don't know what's going on with the plot. So I mean that critique for this book in the most positive way possible, because there's a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue. The book doesn't seem like it's going to conform to normal, you know, fantasy tropes, and it's really engaging. I really like that about this book. I'm not sure how to describe the plot of this book. The plot's way more straightforward in the other 2 books, so I'm going to go into the characters and explain them instead. Vintage. I don't think Vintage is the main character in the whole series, but she's probably the main character in this book. She's definitely pushing the plot forward. So I suspect that Jen Williams kind of wrote herself in as Vintage. And normally when an author does that, it comes off as really cringe. But that's not the case at all with this character. Vintage is awesome. And I think my favorite thing about Vintage is she really just defies all conventional tropes. You know, in most fantasies, 40-year-old women are
At home raising kids, or they're just too old and not really excited to see the rest of the world.
Vintage, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. She's been locked up her whole life behind the cage of responsibility, and now that her estate is kind of built up enough that her employees can kind of run things on her own, she wants to get out and see the rest of the world for herself. And there's really no one who outranks her who can tell her not to. So she's this 4-year-old who's kind of seen everything under the sun, and she has the money to like finance her expeditions. And she just goes out and kicking butt. And it's really fun because it defies a lot of tropes, and it's fresh. I really enjoyed Vintage's character. So every time the alien race that Vintage is studying showed up, historically speaking, they were pushed back by the race of elves, wood elves that Jin created for this fantasy universe, known as the Eborans. Eborans? Guys, I didn't listen to the audiobook. I have no idea how to pronounce any of this stuff. Anyway, the Eborans have a lot of POV characters across this book series, despite the fact that there's only like 6 of them still alive. So they're all dying because their god tree, Yzgmor? I don't know how to say this. He basically died at the end of the last invasion of the alien race. And when he died, he stopped creating the sap that gives these elves basically long-lasting life. Now, the elves were able to work around that by taking blood instead. And so it's really cool. She basically blended like elves, wood elves, and vampires into this horrifying amalgamation of races. So prior to any of the events that take place in this book, the 8th alien invasion took place. Something happened with the aliens and the god tree that made the aliens disappear completely and killed the god tree. The vampire slash elves went on a crusade where they just slaughtered hundreds of thousands of humans and siphoned their blood. But it all came at a cost because that blood drove them slowly insane and didn't prolong their lives as much as the sap would, and it kind of made them infertile. So now none of them can produce offspring. So at the start of this book series, there's only like 6 Eborans left. And the only reason they're still alive is that they were absurdly young when the god tree died. So they haven't died of old age yet, basically. Side note, of those 6 that are left, one of them's a lesbian, one of them's gay, and 2 of them are siblings. Like, these guys are oh man, they're never coming back from this. Anyway, so one of the few Eborans left, Tor, basically left his homeland, and he's kind of like disgraced by the few Eborans who still remember him because he left. But at the same time, there's only like 4 other people alive. Like, who are you worried about offending, my dude? Anyway, he goes out into the world to hook up with random hotties because his home world is dying and looks sadder than a FromSoft game. Our third main character, Noon, is randomly born with the ability to create Winnow Flame. And the way her ability works is she can siphon life energy from any human or being or anything alive that she touches and convert that energy into this green, otherworldly flame that's incredibly destructive. She's super dangerous for 3 reasons, really. The first is that she could kill people just by siphoning too much of their life energy. The third is, you know, Winnow Flame is absurdly hot, and it scares the crap out of everyone else who lives in this fantasy world. And the third reason is everyone who has this gift is randomly born with it, and there's no like mentors with this gift throughout the kingdom. So no one really knows how to channel it. And so when most people come to this ability, they're still young, and they accidentally like mutilate people around them. And then like terrible fear grips the peasantry and they turn this poor girl in. And so people who are born with this ability end up going to the Winnowing, which is this awful castle that holds all of these women in horrible conditions. Like we treat terrorists better than these women are treated, you know? There's no Geneva Conventions in this world. And these women live in this basically horrible prison system where their power is exploited to create this narcotic, basically, that gives people sweet dreams. That was a convoluted way to explain that. So those are the 3 main characters in the book. And the plot of this book ends up starting and moving because people start having these nightmares that the Juralai, the alien race, is coming back. And this time, there are no Eborans left to defend them and drive them back. So while everyone's having these nightmares, Vintage is using Tor and Noon and their unique abilities to help her explore these alien ruins to discover more about the alien race. So as far as I can remember, there are only 6 POVs in this first book, and I'll list them all on the screen here. And I thought they were almost all fantastic. The only one I didn't like was this guy right here. I don't know how to say his name because he's like nihilistic and he basically spends all of his days living like a modern girlfriend with anxiety and not doing anything, just doom scrolling for hours and hours and wallowing in depression. It's like It's really sad. And if I wanted to interact with someone like that, I would just talk to my brother's ex. But here's the thing. After reading a whole bunch of other epic fantasies, I've realized that I will take a bad or mediocre POV over one that I just found infuriating any day of the week. Any day of the week. Oh my goodness. The last 2 epic fantasies I tried to get into, I could not stand. Couldn't stand them. And just to clarify, for these other book series, I enjoyed all these characters. I enjoyed the world building. I didn't like the journey that these characters went on during their POVs. Does that make sense? I plan to make another video on this channel going over why I have so many problems with these popular epic fantasies. And hopefully some of y'all agree with me. Otherwise, I'm going to have an existential crisis and I'm going to have to rename this channel something stupid like
I have trash taste.
And fun fact, much like Stephen King, there is a sex scene snuck in here. It's so much tamer than what I normally read. I honestly forgot that it was in here at all. Your boy's cooked. Another fun fact, the characters in this book are obsessed with wine. Like, it occurs in almost every single chapter. And like, I'm talking like every conversation starts with a bottle of wine. And normally I'm all for it. But when I read these books, I was a teetotal in the middle of NTC. I kid you not. I read most of these books in the middle of the night in a JLTV pulling radio guard with a red light under a poncho. And I was just trying not to fall asleep. This first book was so good. It kept me up. I loved it. So the biggest point I wanted to make in this book review is why this book was so much better than these 2. There's a lot of reasons why, and I'm going to try and define it as well as possible. These books are more straightforward. They follow more traditional tropes. I want to say they're not as well written, but that might not be the case. They're just not as engaging. Another reason is that this book introduces an additional POV that is not very good. Basically, it's this child who's an Eborn child who was somehow born, but you know, because the Eborns have problems reproducing because of the blood that they've been consuming, he's like born kind of sickly, and we're supposed to find him like endearing, but he comes off as kind of creepy, like those red rum girls from The Shining. You know what I mean? And I just feel like it doesn't work, you know? And lastly, this book just has so much more intrigue. Hey, just a heads up, this is a spoiler warning for the first book. So as you can kind of guess from the foreshadowing, the aliens do return at the end of this book. And so these next 2 books are them just trying to fight those aliens. Whereas this book, you're basically exploring haunted ruins. There are all kinds of crazy interactions the characters have. Noon recently escaped from the Winnowing, and so people from the Winnowing are trying to track her down. All around, it's a really engaging read. Whereas this book was really slow. Like, this book doesn't really pick up until halfway through the book. I remember trying to read this at night and just struggling to stay awake. I would like open the JLTV doors to get some cold air in, step outside for a bit, and then come back inside and be like, okay, I gotta finish this book. You know, and I am glad I finished it. You know, I would probably give this book, just if it gets 3 stars, it just barely gets 3 stars. I can confidently give this one 3 stars. This one, I don't know, somewhere between 2 and 3, because the second half of the book saves it and is significantly better than the first half. Where was I going with all this? Yeah. I did not consume any wine when I was reading this book series, and I really wish I had, because this entire book series really made me want to drink some wine. But yeah, this concludes my book review of the Winnowing Flame trilogy. I tried not to include any spoilers. Really did enjoy the trilogy. I don't regret that I read these books, but I am proud that I read this one. I would strongly recommend the first one. And if you really fall in love with the characters, then just like keep up with the series and check out the other 2. But I'll definitely be checking out what Jen writes in the future, and y'all have a good day.